Welcome to No Filter. My name is Eli Zared, and this is my first podcast after, 40 years in the business. This is a new entity, something a little different, and I guess the name No Filter I should explain. I'm not going to shy away from expressing opinions, which doesn't seem too strange in this day and age of no filter cable news, tribal cable news where it's red versus blue. It's the Trump station versus the anti-Trump station. I think Rush Limbaugh kind of called his syndrome. He started this where there's no balance needed. You don't have to show the other side. And it's so different from when I started in radio and television ages ago. So I don't feel old, and I feel really good, but I am relatively so, because it was 50 years ago, as I was telling our guest today, and I'll introduce Jimmy King shortly. That was 50 years ago that I wound up as a freshman at Michigan, which is stunning enough that it was 50 years ago this month that I showed up there. And back then, although I had no idea that I would ever become a sports reporter, back then, balance was what journalism was. If you could go back to those days, you'd realize that when a news show came on, there was news, and then editorial was very, very different. It was separated. The first guy that I worked for in television at Channel 4, Al Ackerman, would put commentary on the screen under his name, which meant, okay, we're not doing news now. This is my opinion. It doesn't necessarily reflect that of the station. Well, now it's become a big mishmash where it's all opinion. Whether you watch Fox News or you watch CNN or you listen to sports talk radio, the news is only a very small part of it. The rest is, what do you think about things? How does that impact you? How can you create some type of stir by taking an opinion on something? And so it's all become a big mishmash. And in sports, it's generally in sports talk radio, which I did was a very difficult format. And I guess this is the closest to it. It's either this is great or this sucks. I love LeBron or I hate LeBron. I love what the Tigers are doing. I hate what they're doing. And so it's all become a big mishmash. So when I say no filter, it's almost like news has become no filter. But then again, by no filter, I mean I'm going to give my opinions. I'm going to say what I think. You can like it or not. And I wasn't always able to be a no filter kind of guy because, like I say, news was different back then. So when, in fact, a career move that I made in 1986 that I came to regret from time to time, I went to New York to do Channel 7 news in New York. It was a big career move for me. And I'd been on there about a month or so, and Howard Stern was really coming into his own then. And I had known Howard back in Detroit when he was on W4. He was doing FM radio, and he got fired, et cetera. Then 3 or 4 years later, when he was in New York and I went there, he was a huge star. And he said one day, it got back to me, he said, when I used to listen to Eli Zared in Detroit, he was really opinionated. And now what's he become on Channel 7 in New York? He's just doing the news. And I said, you're right. I didn't really know how to take it in that format and be a little bombastic and be opinionated. It might have helped me. I kind of failed at that part of my career. But there's different aspects of this reporting thing. For example, you take the guys that do play-by-play. They are hired by a team and hired by a station to basically be PR men. And I did that too. I did it with the Pistons, was one of my last on-air jobs. And I found that to be a very, very different act altogether. You listen to George Blaha, you listen to Mario Impemba, you listen to Jim Brandstatter do a Michigan game, and it's a very different act than what talk radio is. You are paid by the team, and therefore everything comes out in roses. There's no such thing where Mario Impemba will say, oh, my God, he got hit in the head by a fly ball. That is the most bonehead play I've ever seen. No, Mario will say, well, a little misjudged by the right fielder there, and he was able to take second on the misplay. So it's the way you say things that is filter or no filter. So I've had it on, I've had it off. And I must say, I started out as a no filter guy because my idol when I was a kid was Howard Cosell. I don't know if anybody remembers Howard Cosell. He died about 20 years ago, but he was the first tell it like it is type of guy. And the reason I loved him was, wow, not only was he eloquent, not only did he speak beautifully, not only did he have a great command of the language, but he took opinions, and he would take people down if he thought they did something wrong. And I thought, what guts? And that's what I want to be. So I go to college, and I got to tell you this story because my career really, really shouldn't have happened. If any of you have followed me over the years, it's all a matter of luck because as a freshman, as I mentioned, at Michigan, this is back in 1968. Understand, okay? Television began in 1948. That was the first time that a signal actually went into somebody's house. So I was a freshman in 1968. Television was still new. It was still a new medium back then. In fact, I don't think many people had colored TVs until, the 1970s. So in my freshman year, I took introduction to radio and television. I didn't have a lot of confidence. I didn't grow up in a household where people patted me on the back and said, you can be whatever you want to be. Just believe in yourself, follow your dreams, and things will work out. I didn't have that backing. I didn't have that confidence. So my first month at Michigan taking this introductory course, and my professor is a guy named Dr. Edgar Willis, and he's sitting up there with a suit. He was back in the early days of television, never became a TV star, but had worked in it. So here's this voice of authority. Here is a man who knows broadcasting, and I'm just a freshman here. He takes me aside and he says to me, after we did a couple of writing assignments, he goes, you're a good writer, and that commercial was very, very good. We had to make up a commercial. He said, but your voice is too distinctive. It's not going to work. You need to have a deep, resonant voice to make it in this medium. And yours is going to be too distracting. People aren't going to be able to really listen to what you're saying because your voice is such a distraction. And like an idiot, like a kid with no confidence, I believed him. And he told me I should concentrate on the other side of the microphone, whatever that meant. So I did. And then an interesting thing happened. I graduated from Michigan and I got my degree in communications. I'm at a party talking sports with some guys, and I get a tap on the shoulder. And this guy says, you really seem to know sports, but what I really like about you is you have a very interesting voice. And I'm thinking, wait a minute, who are you? My professor told me that I had no chance, that I was in the wrong career. Why did I believe him? Who's right here? And why am I going on what somebody else says instead of what I really believe? So I got into FM radio, and I got very, very lucky. There were some major innovations that fueled my career. And the first one was that FM radio back then, people may remember or not, depending on how old you are, was really an underground medium. And that's because FM radios weren't in cars. So if you wanted to listen to the FM radio, you had to buy a converter in your car or spend a lot of money on it. So FM radio was underground. My first car I bought in Ypsilanti was a 74 Duster for $3,100, but an FM radio was $150. So wait a minute, that's 5% of the value of my car. I can't afford an FM radio, and that's what millions of people said. And then an incredible thing happened in 1977. The big three said, we're going to now make FM radios standard equipment in cars. And overnight, the business changed. Suddenly, being the FM kind of hippy-dippy sportscaster and having opinions and learning my craft, suddenly FM radio is on top of the heap. Within a matter of months, you never heard a song on AM. Who would listen to a song on AM? We could hear it on FM with this deep, resonant bass and all that. So I got very, very lucky with that. I got lucky again because another incredible innovation the next year was that videotape had been developed where they created a thing called a porta-pack, where the one guy would carry the machine that recorded it, the other guy had the camera, and they would go out and they could shoot news items, and that night they could be on TV. Maybe you've heard a joke over the years, say film at 11. That's because if you shot something in the morning, you were lucky to have it on the air by 11, film at 11. So I was very lucky to be on the cutting edge of videotape. And frankly, guys that didn't know how to use videotape, the older sportscasters like Al Ackerman, I went to work with at Channel 4, it really cost them their career in some way because this sudden new ability to talk over highlights changed the whole business. And then in 1980, something even more ridiculous happened. This new network called ESPN comes along, and they got these satellites. Their satellites have been around for a little while, but now it's being used for broadcast. And they could show you a game from Australia. In fact, one of the first things they did was called Australian Rules Football. They could show you an actual game that took place across the world that day. It was mind-boggling. So that's the third thing. And so what happened was there was a lady at Channel 4 named Gail Granick, who was actually married to the assistant NBA commissioner, Russ Granick, and they hired her away to ESPN. So here I am doing local radio, and I get a call from a former Michigan athlete, one of my best friends of all time, former quarterback named Dennis Franklin. He was working at Channel 4, and he said, "Hey, they're going to replace Gail Granick. Why don't you come down and audition for this job?" So I did. I did a little demo, and I got that job. So I was very, very lucky to be in that position. So, long story short, water under the bridge. And by the way, the reason I'm telling you what I've done is because I've done so many different things. People forget where they even know me from. I've been fired 6 times in media. I got fired 6 times, which is probably par for the course. So it's been a long career. I was very lucky when I was out of work in 1995. I left Channel 2 for some unexplainable reason, a bad career choice. I started doing a show with Kirk Gibson and Gary Danielson on radio and television, and went past that for 5 or 6 years. That was very successful. I changed again. Gibby became the manager of the assistant manager of the Tigers, or the bench coach of the Tigers. So I moved on from that. Then I got to work for the Pistons, and that was interesting because to travel with an NBA team or a professional team is a very enlightening experience that I had never had before. And frankly, the things I saw in my 6 years with the Pistons are stunning, where a team went from winning the Eastern Conference every year to being flat out awful, all in my time there. So at first it was a lot of fun telling great stories about, Chauncey Billups and Rasheed Wallace and all positive stuff. And then when the whole thing started to go to shit, what an experience that was to see how the entire aura of the organization changes from this uplifting, we can be whatever we want to be, to finger pointing, to accusing the coaches, to accusing each other, just ugliness. And the period when John Kuster was there, and they had the boycott in Philadelphia where the players actually decided not to show up for a game or a practice, I said, this shows how weird and different and unique the world of sports is. Here you got guys like Ben Wallace and Rip Hamilton making $12 or $13 million a year and saying, I'm not going to come to work today. Screw this. This is BS. And I go, how can that happen? And then you get Allen Iverson there. And I'd say to Joe Dumars, Joe, didn't you know that he's an alcoholic and a gambling addict? Didn't you know that? How can this happen? And I'm not going to tell you what his answer was necessarily. He thought that he could get past it because he wanted to use his expiring contract. But the level of disrespect and the fact that how in a business can an employee insult the boss in front of the whole team and say you're a fraud, still make his money, and get his uniform retired 5 years later. It is the weirdest world ever. And then you get, well, I can go on and on and on by that. In any case, no filter. There'll be no cheap shots, no vendettas. I don't care if you agree or disagree. The point is, I'm going to tell you what I think. I'm not going to take anybody down who doesn't deserve it, and we're going to go on from there. So we'll see. This is very similar to talk radio. Talk radio is a very, very difficult format. We were talking about it beforehand, how hard it is to keep sports interesting for 4 hours and what an art it is. And I've done everything in media from short for my first, I had a network. I was the first, when I got the job in FM radio, I was the first ever nationally syndicated FM reporter when FM was new. I did that on the ABC network. And so on and on it goes from there. Here we are. And of all the things I've done over the years, talk radio is by far the most challenging and difficult. To keep it interesting, to build a topic, to engage the audience, to take phone calls, to balance it all, and keep it interesting for 4 hours is very, very difficult. So this is going to be a shorter than 4 hours. We'll see how long it goes, half an hour, whatever works. So anyway, I'd like to introduce my first guest. I crossed paths with this young man back in the early 90s. I was at Channel 2 at the time. I think I was doing a show with Denny McClain at the time called The Eli and Denny Show. That's a whole other story. My career with Denny McClain, that'll come up. He should be a guest on the show at some point, and I'm sure he will. I guess anybody's open to be a guest, and I'm going to start with this young man. We crossed our paths in the early 90s. The Fab Five, probably the most highly touted recruiting class in history. Legendary, groundbreaking, trend-setting, the greatest recruiting class ever, like I said, and something that ended in scandal. I put quotes around that 10 years later. So I'd like to welcome Jimmy King, who came from Plano, Texas, to be part of the Fab Five. And tell me, Jimmy, first of all, welcome. I'm glad you're going to be here.
Thank you, Eli. Thank you for having me.
So I know they signed Juwan Howard. He was the first.
Juwan was the first.
But really, it was Weber and Jalen who were the local guys. What are the chances that you get two guys in one market, the same age, that can go on to become NBA stars?
Mm-hmm.
So how did it all play out? How did you wind up coming here?
Well, originally, I'm from South Bend, Indiana, and that's what most people don't know. They think I came all the way from the South, being a Texas boy, but I'm a Midwest kid, and my family is in South Bend, so the journey from South Bend to Michigan is only 2.5 hours. So it was close enough that I was home, but far enough where my family couldn't bug me every weekend. That's the reason why I went to Michigan.
And so how did Weber and Jalen, and what number were you signed? Did they sign before you?
I was second. Juwan was first, and Juwan really should get credit for the Fab Five because he recruited us all. There were some days I would come home from practice and I love you, Big Nuke. That's what we call him, Big Nuke. I love you, Juwan. But some days I tried to avoid his phone call because he was tireless. He would call us every day and say, hey, what's going on? Where you at? You know, what decision are you going to make? And who made some progress this week with you? Is it Kansas? Is it North Carolina? You know, who is it?
How many teams were after you, by the way?
About all. I mean, you know, we were all top 10.
So you could have gone wherever you wanted.
Couldn't win anywhere. And, you know, that's what made it special, that you had a guy like Juwan who was arguably number one because it changed every week between Chris, Juwan, and Big Dog Glenn Robinson. So if you look at the rankings, there were 1, 2, and 3, those three guys. And then Jalen and I fluctuated anywhere between 5 and 9 and 10.
And you're talking nationally, not just in your position.
Yeah, just nationally. Being the number one shooting guard, Jalen number one swing man, Juwan and Chris being the number one forwards, 1, 2, and 3. And so we fluctuated all through it. And Ray actually was still top 50, one of the top players in the state of Texas. But
talk about Ray Jackson, right?
Ray Jackson. And but for me, the option was the beauty between getting a great education at the University of Michigan and playing at a high level athletically. That's how I really ultimately decided to go to Michigan. And it was the same for all, because you have to qualify. You know this, of being a Michigan grad, you know they just don't take anybody. You qualify.
Frankly, I don't know how it works in athletics. I mean, Jim Harbaugh, when he left, said, when he was at Stanford, said, don't think Michigan's different than anybody else. That's very hard for the public to understand what the standards are. Remember years ago, Paul Hornung said, that we have to lower our standards at Notre Dame so we can get more black players.
Yes,
so is it different at every school? Was Michigan different than the other Big Ten?
It is different in schools. In Michigan, I will say, is probably one of the last few dinosaurs that hold the players to that standard. I know that, it was a big deal for us coming in. A lot of people didn't give us credit, for qualifying. They thought we just kind of just walked in there. But all the athletes there qualified, even the football players. It was not a myth.
Well, I want to get back to how you got recruited, but it seems to me it's impossible to be both. It's impossible to be a good student and make the time commitment to play for a team. And I know, in fact, I told you years ago, I forget his last name, but Neil was my buddy Neil.
Neil, that's right.
Was your tutor.
Yes, he was.
So how did you manage to balance being a full-time player and a full-time student?
We had a great support system, and we held each other accountable. Like I said, academics was a big part of all of us. It wasn't a myth. We held each other accountable. There were nights we stayed up to 3, 4 in the morning doing 30-page papers, typing them out. That's back in the day where you had to look up the reference, go get the reference card.
No internet.
And then go to the bookshelf and
kidding.
hope it was
How'd
there.
you have time to do that? It makes no sense.
We were up at 3 in the morning. So and you are there to play sports. It's not that, they sell a different thing for you to your parents. When they come into that living room, they tell your parents, oh, he's going to get a great education. We're going to take care of him. But the first day that you walk on campus, that message is you're here to do one thing, and that's to play whatever respective sport that you're playing, which was basketball for me. And they made that clear. That was the first message that we got when we walked onto the court our first day of practice.
Could you have gotten through if you didn't study? Would they have picked you up and supported you, or did you actually have to pass these classes?
You had to pass your classes.
You had to take the
That's
test
right.
for yourself.
You had to take a test. There was no test takers for us.
It's funny, when I did the show with Gibson for years, I said, Kirk, I forget, what did you major in college? And he said, I majored in eligibility. That's what I assume it is. They discourage you from taking a real challenging curriculum.
Well,
so
they do. They funnel you into some classes that you may have taken when you were in high school. My experience was there was a kinesiology class that I took. My first class, I'm excited. I'm University of Michigan. I made it. It's big time. And I go to this class, and I was so insulted. I was so insulted that this class that I took was a class that I have taken in high school in 9th grade. I knew everything in there. And so I went back to my academic advisors, and I told them, I was like, y'all made a mistake. This is not for me. I don't know, other athletes may be cool with this, but not me. And that was the start when they were like, oh, these guys are very outspoken. They don't just go with the flow.
I see. So in other words, just take your 4 credits.
Just take your credits and stay eligible and play this game of basketball. But no, we're there to get a great education as well for our future.
I'll tell you a little story about that. So about 5 or 6 years ago, I'm playing a charity softball tournament, and Jalen was just starting to get his career was taking off with ESPN, and Chris was kind of struggling. He was doing some TNT stuff. Mm-hmm. And I said, Jalen, man, I'm impressed. You are good. You just get it, man. You get exactly what to do. You got a great attitude on the air. You smile. You're comfortable. So Chris seems a little tight. And Jalen says, I told him to go to class. He never went to class. I took the broadcast classes. He didn't. That's it was kind of laughing about it. But I'll give him credit. The dude studied and he took the classes, and it really paid off in the end.
But that gives you a tell of the work ethic as well. And also, Chris had a lot of things handed to him. So he feel like he could get away with not actually putting in the work sometimes. So your personality is able to carry you on the basketball court. That's what you're used to. You can smile, laugh, talk a little noise and dunk on somebody. But when you have to get into the booth, you have to report, you got to be knowledgeable, have all your notes ahead of you, be well prepared. That's what Jalen did. And Chris finally is doing it, and he's getting a little better. But Jalen has always taken it seriously. Jalen would always read the paper and get information on opponents back in the day, where it was just print media. Yeah. And so today is very, very easy for you now when you could just go on the internet and look up multiple.
Okay, so let's go back. So Juwan recruits you, and then you're in, and did that influence
Ray.
Chris and Jalen? Tell me how that one happened.
Ray was third.
Okay.
He saw a Texas kid, go all the way from Texas to Michigan, so he followed. And Ray grew up as a football fan, and so the winged helmet, that was a big deal for he and I, being in a football state. So when he saw me commit, he committed also because he thought that it wouldn't be.
Had you known him? Had you met him?
I never met Ray Jackson. Texas is a huge state. Yeah. So even the only time we would have played each other, I was in the northern part, he was in the southern part of the state. The only time if we would have met each other in high school would have had to been in the finals.
So I'm saying, but you didn't know Chris from national tournaments and stuff like that? Did you know Chris?
I knew of Chris. I knew of Jalen. I knew of Juwan. I knew a little bit of Ray. You hear about each other, but the rules in Texas were different then. We weren't allowed to play in certain tournaments. And I had to there was no room for me to petition. I tried to petition, but they wouldn't allow me. So I wasn't allowed to play in the ABCD camp. I had to choose to play the Dapper Dan and McDonald's because you only could play in 2. Mm-hmm. So that was my choice, was to play in the McDonald's and Dapper Dan. I couldn't go to ABCD camp.
I say all wind up at Michigan as freshmen. And so how did the whole the baggy shorts, how did the trend-setting stuff happen? Who was the catalyst for all that?
we were all the catalyst, and we had a unique situation. We thought alike off the court, and that helped us on the court.
What do you mean you thought alike?
Well, we all wanted baggy shorts. We all wanted to, because the style then
Jordan had started with that, right?
Jordan started it,
right.
But people forget that Illini team, that '89 team, had baggy shorts too.
Okay.
Kendall Gill, Marcus Liberty, those guys. They don't get the credit either. But those guys had some very long shorts. But Jordan came out with the shorts, but we wanted ours to be a little longer.
You're right.
And we had the block M on the side.
Right.
So that accentuated the shorts, and when we ran, it made the shorts
swish back and
swing.
forth. Yeah. And you wore black socks too, right? What was that all about?
Well, the black socks was just
because athletic socks are white.
That's right. And the reason why we chose black socks is we wanted to turn the narrative on the head. We wanted to take control of who we were. So we said we're going to wear black socks and make that popular. When if you showed up on any court, playground, anywhere in America, and you were wearing black shorts or black socks, that meant you couldn't play. People would laugh at you. Those were church socks. You only wore black socks to go to church.
No kidding.
So we
That's a real
changed the
cultural
narrative.
thing I didn't know about.
We changed the narrative, and it was like, okay, we're going to make something that you guys think is not cool, which is the short shorts. Now we're going to go baggier, and then we're going to take the white athletic socks and make them black. And then the black shoes just follow, just to make it more aesthetic.
Yeah. Interesting that if you'd done that at Southeastern Oklahoma State, nobody would have noticed. But you happened to be part of this incredible freshman class and seemed to have a marketing sense back then that didn't come along until years later. So you must know. So talk about Fisher, because Fisher recruited all you, and he seemed like a very laid-back guy, just a really sweet man. He kind of fell into the job. Remember in '89, you probably don't remember when Bill Frieder left.
Absolutely, because Frieder recruited me.
Oh, he did?
Yeah, he did. Frieder recruited me before Fisher. He was the head coach, obviously, before Steve Fisher.
But that was 2 years earlier.
I had been recruited since I was a freshman in high school. The first letter I got was from Louisville.
Louisville.
Yeah.
I figured that may come up later when we talk about some of the abuses in
But Rick Pitino was at Kentucky by the time I was a senior, and my story about Rick Pitino is he came to pick me up personally himself from the airport when I visited Kentucky as one of my 5 official visits. He personally came, put my bags in the car in his 600 Benz, white on white, cocaine white seats. I was like, this is how you do it, huh? And he looked at me, he said, if you want one of these, you come to Kentucky.
No kidding. What a sleaze bag. What a
and
piece of shit.
And he took me straight to his house.
Yeah.
Had dinner or breakfast. It was early in the morning. It was like 8:30 in the morning. Breakfast with his wife and kids.
Yeah.
And then we went on
Pretty
campus.
compelling.
Yeah. And it's hard at 16, 17 years old to turn down the 600 Benz, but your integrity is everything.
Was that before you had been recruited by Fisher?
No, it was the same time.
Okay.
All this was going on at the same time.
So we don't have to go over the success the team had. It was pretty. Actually, the first year, I remember your first year, you're only 19-9, and then you, I forget how you. I guess were you low seeded in the tournament?
We were 6th seed.
Oh, okay.
We were 6th seed, which is a modest seed. We thought we should have been higher. We were 3rd, tied for 3rd in the Big Ten. Big Ten had at that time we're taking 7 teams into the tournament. One of the best conferences in the country. Hall of Fame coaches all throughout. So it was a tough league.
I remember when you went that incredible freshman year, and then you lost to Duke in the finals. I remember it was at the Minnesota, the Dome. I forget what they called it. But it was
Metrodome.
Metrodome, that's right. And so the first, and I didn't cover the team that closely. Being on Channel 2, I had everything else to cover. So, I didn't have time to go to games. I was doing the 11 o'clock news. I couldn't really go to a game. So that's one of the ironies about being a top anchor. You're stuck in the studio, and you really can't get to know the players like you do when you're a reporter. But then we're crouched there in the hallway after the game. You guys are coming down the hallway there to the locker room, and then Chris started doing the thing about I'm a man, I forget what he was doing. It was like this really angry rant. I'm thinking,
Yes.
where'd Where'd that come from? I
Mm-hmm.
don't quite understand that. Well, I mean, we know we have total respect for you guys as players. What was he the one with the attitude, or was it? Did you all share that, or what? Like you've been disrespected and all that.
Well, we all had attitudes. We all felt that we were the best. But I think the thing with Chris is that at some point he wasn't allowed to show that he was an individual. He was always poked and prodded, and people always wanted something from him. And so I think we hear the stories like Michael Jackson, they always want to relive their childhood. He wasn't able to, grow out of that. He's always connected to being the best at every stage. Everywhere he's been the best. Even in Sacramento, where they had a chance to go to the finals, and, he's embodied as the team leader. But I don't think his personality fits that. And so he put on a persona and developed a persona in order to make the outside world feel that he was that. And internally, he was having a battle. And so when it came out, when you have adversity and you don't know what to do and to say, that's how that came out. I'm a man. I'm this, I'm that. And really, you're just a young man or a young boy hurting inside who doesn't know how to express his feelings.
Yeah. I've always wondered about the scrutiny that athletes have to endure. I look at myself. I just told the story earlier about having no confidence. When I went to Michigan as a freshman, I wasn't the kid who said, I'm going to be a sports reporter. I don't care what anybody does. Nobody's going to stop me. I'm on a mission. The first guy who said something to me, I said, okay, I guess that was an unrealistic thing. So when you're an athlete and you're a teenager, and although it's probably not as bad in college, but still, because the Fab Five was able to say, hey, we don't care what you think. We're wearing baggy shorts. We're wearing the black church socks, and we're gonna turn it into sports. So you give out an aura of not caring, or that you can't ruffle my feathers, but you're still really impressionable young men.
And we were just trying to live up to the hip hop standard. Hip hop was individuality. What can we do that's ours to make you take notice, but also that you will want to represent? That's what it was. And we had each other to lean on. It would have been difficult if it was just one or two of us. It was five of us, 5 top recruits, guys that, it wasn't that we were going out there laying eggs. Our first televised game against Duke, we took them into overtime, the national defending champions, and should have beat them, which, Rob Pelinka, I love you, man. The general manager of the Lakers rose to the top, but you should have passed that ball to me on the wing instead of throwing that shot at the top of the key.
I'm trying to remember, refresh my memory, because I was there. It was all kind of a mishmash. What was it late in the game?
It was overtime, and
the game went. I forgot.
It was overtime.
Duke beat you in overtime. That's right.
Yep, it was overtime.
Who had the big lead and who caught up?
They started out early. I think they were up 15 first half, and
that's right.
And then not to toot my own horn, but when I came in, we chopped it down a little bit, hit a couple of threes from the wing, got a dunk on the baseline, and that kind of changed the game, gave my teammates some confidence, because that was my role. I'm the quiet guy externally, but internally, I'm the one that's doing all the talking.
And so Pelinka took a three instead of hitting you on the wing.
And
he was cold off the bench, and you were on fire.
So at the end of the game, it was chaotic, as you can imagine, and Rob caught the ball at the top of the key, and usually he swings it right away. And I was just holding Bobby Hurley off just enough that I can give him a target, give Rob a target to pass to me, and he didn't pass it. And so at that point, everybody was kind of lost, because if you ever go back and watch the games, when the game was on the line, I've hit more game-winning shots than anybody in Michigan history.
Is that right?
Oh, yeah.
A little-known stat. I want to talk about how it ended with the Fab Five, what you all did afterwards. We're going to take a little break here. We're back in a minute. We do have a couple of sponsors here, and I want to talk about Hoot McInerney's Star Lincoln. When somebody buys or leases this Lincoln at Star, they tap into luxury, legacy, and a piece of Detroit and American history. You know, it was 100 years ago, 1917, that Henry Leland started this new venture and named it after his hero, Abraham Lincoln. And 50 years later, Hoot McInerney, already an icon among car dealers, named his dealership Star Lincoln, believing that Lincoln was the star among American luxury cars. And this year, Navigator took its star turn. It was voted 2018 North American Truck of the Year. Star continues to represent its iconic name with a newly remodeled showroom, immaculate service area, and a promise to offer each customer the lowest prices Lincoln will allow. Henry and Hoot are no longer with us, but Lincoln and McInerney's carry on the tradition. With a staff ready to serve, see the full line of SUVs as well as the historic Continental, and experience another lasting tradition, the Star treatment at Hoot McInerney Star Lincoln at 12 and Telegraph in Southfield. So let's kind of jump to the end here. The next year, you make it to the finals again and lose to North Carolina. Mm-hmm. The famous play I had a hard time seeing it. I was at that game too. I was sitting behind the North Carolina bench. It was hard for me to see, but Weber calls the timeout, and it was one of those iconic plays. At the time, you say, will it ruin his career? I said, no, it's not going to ruin his career. This will pass. But what did it represent? Does it just represent the tremendous pressure under you guys, the glare of the spotlight, a simple mistake that was magnified? Tell me about it.
And that's what it was. It was a simple mistake. We don't get there without Chris. You know, Chris is the anchor. He's the centerpiece. You know, we knew with his talent, you know, he was a man-child. His hands are so big, you could throw him anything, he'll catch it. It didn't matter where you put it. His target range was incredible. And, you know, he made plays that you just shake your head at. For instance, the game before against Kentucky, which in a lot of people's eyes was actually the national championship because they were rolling. They had won like 30 games straight. The monster mash, Jamal Mashburn was incredible, hard to guard. Travis Ford was in an incredible role. You know, that they had a great, Rick Pitino was coaching that team. They had a great run. But Chris would get the ball off the rebound, come down the court, shake a guy, throw a 50-foot pass behind his back on target for a layup. But then at the end of the North Carolina game, you travel, come down the court, and go to the sideline instead of going to the basket. I don't know.
Yeah,
I just think
I remember the stumble in the backcourt. I saw that. I was sitting near that, right? Yeah.
And so, you know, and people ask me all the time, why didn't you and Jalen come back from the ball? I was like, well, we didn't do that all year. Yeah. If Jawan grabbed it off the board, if Chris grabbed it off the board, everybody fills the lane because everybody can handle the ball. That was our advantage, and we knew it. Like we knew that early. That was our game plan since day one. And so for him to do that was just mind-boggling. It was just a moment where a kid, a 19-year-old kid, made a mistake. And that's how we viewed it. And even in the locker room, we didn't discuss it. I mean, Chris was laying in the locker room in the middle of the floor, a cold, ice-cold, concrete slab floor. Nobody said a word. And if you dropped a pin, and, you know, the proverbial pin in it, it would have echoed so loud. You could hear somebody inhaling, and it sounded like a jackhammer.
Well,
that's how deafening it was in there.
Wow. Laughing about it years later. So let's go from there. So I was looking up the other day. Between Chris, Jalen, and Juwan, they played 50 years combined in the NBA. Their salaries alone were $429 million. You throw in endorsements, and those three guys earned $500 million.
Yeah, I want my cut. I'm still waiting on my cut.
You, a different story. And so your life has been very different than theirs because of that. You certainly gave it a try. You were a second-round pick. And you played a little with Toronto, your rookie year. After that, I don't know how many years it was, but you followed the dream. You tried to follow the dream. And I can imagine you're the CBA, you're playing in Europe, you know, you're living on peanuts while these guys are enjoying these incredible professional careers. What was it like to be pursuing a professional dream that you'd had your entire life and running into one roadblock after another while the three of them are enjoying this incredible superstardom in the pros. That must have been a very, very difficult period of your life.
Well, you know, as you graduate and you move on from a young man to a mature man, you understand that every man has their keep. And even though we grew up together through the basketball ranks, they earned what they got. And I was trying to do the same. I earned what I got. There were some roadblocks along the way. There were some hate along the way, and it was apparent. You know, there were
What do you mean by that?
There were situations where, you know, I sat across the table from executives and they wouldn't even address me by name. They would just call me Fab Five, and I knew that it wasn't a endearing Fab Five. It was like, you know, you Fab Five guys. You know, so
Wait a minute, was he saying, well, don't think because you were the Fab Five that we owe you anything, or is
Absolutely.
he saying, or is he?
Yeah, oh yeah.
Yeah.
No, you know, this is.
But you're saying that you were
put on
resented for it.
You put on your grown man pants and you learn real quickly, you know, who cares for you and who don't. And even when we were coming up, they didn't, you know, if you know, you remember there was no love. They didn't love us. We made them respect us.
You talking about the basketball world at large?
At large. You know, we were hated overall pretty much. And we didn't care. We were like, well, you're going to love us or hate us. And we're going to keep doing what we're doing. And eventually we got the respect because we kept winning and playing good basketball. And we won the hearts. But overall, people, you know, they started to come over a little bit. There were a lot of Duke fans, North Carolina fans, Ohio State, Michigan State that, you know, just to name a few, that didn't care for us. And you can imagine that there were other players and people and influencers who didn't like the way that we changed the game.
Well, I think, you know, it even goes beyond that. You know, guys like Muhammad Ali, who was for a while the most reviled athlete in the world. All kinds of stuff caught up in it, the Vietnam War, the black Muslims, the taunting and all that. And you got, and I think, and tell me if I'm wrong, I think, and I was very gratified to see that it all came around in the end, where he goes from this reviled, draft-dodging, reviled human being to an American hero, which is the way things seem to work. But he seemed to empower black athletes to be, because Ali's thing was, I don't have to be who you want me to be. And when I grew up, it was Willie Mays and Hank Aaron. And the only guy that ever spoke out, well, Jim Brown spoke out a little bit, Bill Russell spoke out a little bit, but black guys were supposed to keep your mouth shut and play the game. It was a white man's game when it began. You know, it was hard for you to get in it. Don't take it for granted that this is your game now. It isn't. It's our game. And so it's very, very. And so what you guys did was you said, "Hey, we are who we are." Like Chris said, I'm a man. We're not only just equal to you, we're actually better than you at this game. So don't give me any of that crap anymore. So you did build up resentment from the power elite, so to speak, for stepping out and doing that.
I'll give you an example. I was sitting across, so I was invited to a camp. I'll keep the team nameless, but it was in the northern part. Yeah, it was an NBA team. I go to camp, and there are 3 All-Stars on this team. And and so they expected me, I think, pretty much just to fill a spot, be a early camp guy, and they cut me. But when I go in, I'm averaging more than their stars. One of the stars get injured, so I start starting for them. One of the big stars and I are going head-to-head. We're averaging 16, 18 points a game. And they're coming to me, asking me for advice. I'm giving them advice, and I actually gave them one of their signature moves that they played 20 years in the league with. And eventually, I make it to the last day. I'm the last cut, and they cut me. And when I go into the office for that meeting, the GM sits across the table, and he looks at me. He's like, I have no reason to cut you. I can't cut you. You did everything we asked you to do. But I'm paying this guy $3 million. I would have to cut him and pay you $300,000. So I won't be saving any money. you're a better player, but I'm losing $3 million with him. So we have to let you go. He was like, I'll make a phone call for you anywhere you want to go, anything you need to do. But if you tell anybody about this story, I'll deny it.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a shame, and I'm gonna take the devil's advocate here. If you were a star on the level of Weber, they would have had to do something. So
I don't know about that, because if you remember, Chris won Rookie of the Year, and they traded him.
Yeah, the whole
Jalen Rose was a lottery pick, and he didn't play. He was almost out of the league in Denver. Coach Larry Brown, remember? Mm-hmm. Larry Brown didn't play him. Jalen was pining for minutes, and he was almost out of the league. Jalen had to fight, and that's why I'm saying everybody fought for what they got. Juwan Howard was the first $100 million player. He earned that from his play. Mm-hmm. Nobody gave Chris or Jalen or Juwan anything. They earned it.
No doubt.
So the perception is like, it could have been Weber or Jalen in the same boat as me. It's just that I didn't get drafted high enough where, like in the first round, you get 3 years guaranteed. So you have more opportunities.
Right.
I was a second-round player.
Yeah.
And I was the highest second-round player in the NBA history, paid player in the NBA history. That's another reason that they kind of looked at me like, he's going to break the bank on us.
I think fans, discount or don't understand how hard it is to get to that level. I remember the first time I covered the Tigers, this was like the mid-'70s. I go to spring training, and I see they got the 40-man rosters in the main field there. I look out in the outfield, and my God, there's 4 or 5 fields out there, and there's a bunch of guys running around in Tiger uniforms. Who the hell are they? They were the hundreds of guys in the minor league system. And so the guys in the major league team are making $1 million, and these guys are making $500 a month.
Yes.
And so how hard it is to make it to that level, people don't understand. And how you also have to be a little lucky. Remember, I think it was before your time, but there was a great local athlete. In fact, he was part of the first Fab Five, they called it, Paul Yokish. Mm-hmm. Paul Yokish was a star at Michigan, went on to play football, and it was either an injury or he finally was going to make it. Finally, after 4 or 5 years, this terrible groin injury that just was ruining his career, he was about to make it with the Dallas Cowboys, but they had a rookie they drafted named Jay Novacek, who went on to become maybe a Hall of Famer or something. So that's how close he was to finally getting there. And I mentioned Dennis Franklin earlier.
Yes.
He was a star quarterback at Michigan. Of course, Bo never passed, and so he didn't. And so he ran into a goalpost in a preseason game and had a concussion that ruined his career. And so many get so close. So what you're really saying is that you played on an equal playing field in college with Jalen and Chris and Juwan, and that if not for a matter of fate, luck, draft position, whatever, it could have been you.
Could have been me.
So what type of regrets or bitterness did you have to deal with in the ensuing years?
Well, fortunately, I didn't tie everything into basketball. So outside of that, I had other interests that kept me not so bitter. I think the disappointment, it was more disappointment in that I knew I was just as good. I knew that whenever at Michigan we had a scoring issue or we needed to win the game, they would put the ball in my hands. But the perception was it was the other way around. And that is what I had to fight against. And even though, even in the CBA, I won a championship, CBA, MVP, all of that. Fate stepped in again because in that year, it was the NBA lockout. So the hype that I had built up that year died over the summer with the lockout. So there were a lot of catastrophic things that happened within my career that I look back on and I say, maybe it wasn't meant to be. There's something else that's bigger for me. And I have to embrace that and wrap my mind around that instead of saying what could have been, because we all know the players that I run into today still respect me because they know. They'll never talk down to me or look at me funny. They know I'll kick their ass on the court. and that's good enough for me.
So I know you talk. So tell me what I know you're involved with some camps and stuff.
Yes.
How do you take your career, and how strange it is to think that you reached the peak of your professional, I call it professional, your college, let's say the peak of the success that you sought in what was to be your profession. By the time you were 21 years old, how common that is, and how strange it is that athletes live their lives in reverse. Athletes, even in the best of cases, can play until they're 40, and that's when most people in real careers are just getting started, just taking their experience and their knowledge and their maturity, and they can really start to crank. And an athlete winds up, his career is over, and look at all the years, I don't want to say you wasted because you're pursuing a dream, that you could have been doing something else. So trying and failing is all that much more difficult, but they all wind up in the same position. At least the guys that made a lot of money have that cushion. But you wind up making nothing, and then when you're done, you have nothing and you have to move on. How did you deal with that?
Well, you have to reinvent yourself, and I reinvented myself through finance, through business finance, and you have to teach people how to treat you. Everybody sees you as a basketball player. That's what they remember you from. That's what they know you as. So you have to reinvent yourself as a businessman or whatever team or prospective field you go into. And so the first 5 years for me outside of basketball was very difficult because everybody just wanted to talk about basketball. I wanted to help build their net worth and funnel their money into, stocks, bonds, mutual funds, whatever, right? Insurance. And they took the meeting, but ultimately they wanted to talk about basketball. So that was the biggest deal for me, was really getting people to see me as a businessman and not as a basketball player. Now, you talk about the camps. Actually, I'm doing a camp this week in Saline at Liberty School off Ann Arbor Street. And Monday through Friday, Jalen Rose came yesterday and graced the kids with his presence and got his, he has a deal with Puma, got some Puma shirts and took pictures with the camps, interacted with the kids. So, it's very successful. This is my third year doing it. We'll call it the Jimmy King's Fab 5 camp. I cap it at 100 kids because it's not a money grab. It's really about teaching the kids how to play and how we view the game and really taking care of themselves as CEOs. You're little CEOs because fortunately that's what it is. Like
of your own life, you mean?
Of your own life. Mm-hmm. And if you want to be a player in this game, you have to understand that social media, these things affect you as you grow up and you want to become just a player. For instance, this summer, I had a couple of interviews with the Detroit Pistons, LA Clippers, and a few other teams. And it all went well.
Interviews is what?
Because I'm in an assistant coaches program with the NBA. And what that does is, even though it's called the assistant coaches program, there are other opportunities for you to work with a team, whether it's a G League affiliate team or the NBA team itself. And it's not just for assistant coaches. You have opportunities for scouting, basketball operations, and the like. So for me, my goal is, because I played, obviously, I've done that, I've coached, I've done that, I want to go into the front office. And it's a different interview, obviously, because it's business. And that's what I mean by me reinventing myself, that now I'm able to have the confidence and go into those meetings and know what I'm talking about and have the resume to back it up.
And I can see that 100% because I've had to reinvent myself many, many times in my career. I've done so many different things and wound up in, like I said, I've been fired 6 times, wind up in a little hole and have to figure a way to get out. Did the same thing. I left Channel 2 way too early in 1995. My decision, I was so tired, I had to do something different. I tried talk radio with DFN in 96. That was tough format. I was a program director there too, but that was very difficult. And I created the show. I'm again, I got nothing left there. I start all over again. So I guess what I want to know is when you talk to these kids and you're Jimmy King of the Fab Five, which they have no knowledge of because that happened 20 years before they were born. You had great success, and you also had what could be interpreted as failure. Failure, though, is something that's in a self-perception. You also, even though your NBA career was a failure, you still achieved more than over 99% of players who ever sought out to do what you do. More than 99%, 99.9%. Never get a chance to be in an NBA team. Never get a chance to be a Division I player. So you can look at your life and say, I was a great success and here I am, even though I didn't make it in the NBA, or I was a great failure. So with kids, and look, I gave my own story about not having confidence. Do you have a way of talking to them where you say, look, life is tough. You're going to get beaten down. Here's what you have to believe in. I think that's part of your CEO thing. So I guess, did you learn more from failure that you lay onto them? And how do you explain success and failure to them?
How I explain success and failure to them is that embrace the failure, because you're going to fail more in life than you succeed. It may take that one time for that succession and that you think is going to be your golden egg, and that may happen. But along the way, you're going to find many failures, and you can't stop there. But you take those lessons and you learn from them. You become a better person. You learn what to do, what not to do, how to approach, who not to approach, and you package it. But if you internally let that eat you alive, you will become a bigger failure for quitting. You cannot quit. You have to keep going. There are people in this world who didn't become successful until they were 45, 50 years old. Actors.
Colonel Sanders, 65.
65 years old. I mean,
Morgan Freeman didn't get his first role till he was 52.
You know, and that's why he's still 53 years old with 1,000 movies. That guy seems like he never ages. But that is what I'm talking about with the kids, because the way that the social media is set up, everybody's balling out. Everybody is winning. Everybody looks good. Everybody is the king of the castle, and that's not the truth. And that's why if you have $50 million or $50,000, you live within your means. Don't think that you can't have a very successful life earning $50,000 if you budget. I had a kid yesterday that I spoke with. He was like, "What kind of car do you drive?" And I said, "What difference does it make as long as it gets me to A to B?"
Right.
It doesn't have to be a Bugatti that's $1.2 million where you're paying another couple $100,000 for insurance. Like, that's horrible. How about taking that $1.2 million and just leaving it in the bank, and you're going to get $30,000 to $50,000 off interest?
I got to tell you this little story. Then we're going to take a break, and I want to come back and talk about another issue in the NBA. But it wasn't my last year with the Pistons, but in 2008, they trade Chauncey Billups for Iverson, like I said. So Iverson comes in the last year of his contract. He made $21.6 million for 1 year. So I say to myself, it's the last year of my contract. What would I do? Well, I got 5 kids. I got no future earning possibilities. So here's what I would do. If I had zero, and by the way, he had zero at the time because he blew everything else. So it's very simple. And the end of the story is that everything that I saw Allen Iverson do was the exact opposite of what a rational person would do, which is a function of his. And I didn't think he was stupid. I liked Allen. I thought deep down he's a genius. Genius as a player. So it's just his upbringing, a few blind spots he has. So I say to myself, 21.6. Well, let's give the government the 7. They're going to get the third of it. So I only got 14. I only got 14 or 15 left. So why don't I do this? Why don't I try and force myself, as hard as it is to live on $1 million this year? Let's just live on $1 million. Let's just really tighten it up and get rid of some of these and just force ourselves. Like maybe we'll skip meals on Tuesday, but let's just $1 million. That's a rational thought. What did he do instead? And then you take the other $13 million,
Right.
put it in an interest-bearing account,
Right.
which an advisor like Jimmy King,
right.
post-career, would have told him. And that $13 million, even at 5% interest, you've still got, let's see, 10% would be 1%. So you got $650,000. Never touch the money again, and force yourself to live on $650.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
Instead, what did he do? He went to the casino every night.
Yeah.
And by the way, his weekly paycheck was $454,000. So the man made $454 a week, and
Hit
wound
the
up
lottery every week.
And so I saw this happening in disbelief because I saw so much other dysfunction in the NBA. And sure enough, the next fall, after he left the Pistons, and I think Memphis cut him, he goes to a custody hearing and he can't afford to pay. So what are we dealing with here? How does this happen to people? How can you be in that position? How can there be no adults? And by the way, when you talk about Iverson, he had some pretty good mentors growing up. I think his family was dysfunctional. His father was, but he had some teachers in school. I saw some of the documentaries. He really had a chance. So it's
It's
crazy.
difficult. I mean, you have the majority of the players don't come from a financial savvy background.
Right.
And when you get a lot of money, you think that money's going to be there. You see a check for $500,000 in a week, you're going to splurge early. And unless somebody pulls your coattail that you truly respect, they're going to keep spending because you think those checks will never end.
You think it's tougher, and this, I don't want to sound racially tinged here, is it tougher for black kids growing up poor, or anybody growing up poor, let's say anybody growing up poor, to suddenly be fabulously wealthy? It really takes stability and mentorship to know it. I'll even use my own example because I never set out to make money in sportscasting. And there were times I was making a lot of money. And even though I knew it wouldn't last forever, I still made stupid decisions that I regretted years later. It seems really, really tough to when you have no money, to have money, to try and restrain yourself.
Well, you look at, you talk about the 1%, right? 99.9, right? And just making it to the NBA and having a type of career that you would in college. It's the same when you get that type of money. When you get an astronomical amount of money, you're in that 1%. And therefore, some people, most of the time, you may feel that there is no one that can give you advice. Because a lot of times if, people don't take advice from people who have never done it. And if you don't respect what they have done, how are they going to tell you what to do with your money? And you got family that comes at you that wants a car, a house, trying to open a business, anything. And you feel obligated a lot of times to help them, especially from the black community. And it's not just blacks. It's, there's a lot in the white community that go broke.
Sure.
The narrative is across the board for all. So everybody falls into the same life cycles and issues that, we have
You
as
have to
people.
learn to say no.
You got to learn to say no. And that was the best advice I got from my father. He pulled me to the side because my parents, they're very, they've taught me a lot throughout the years. They let me make my own mistakes. But when they say something, it's very profound. And my father doesn't say much. But the one thing he did say to me at 25 years old, he pulled me to the side. He was like, it's okay to say no. And I've been saying no ever since.
You got it. Last thing I want to go, I see we've run a little longer than I thought here. I don't know how long we've been on, but I was going to do half an hour. I think we're way over that. So last thing I want to talk about in the NBA, to go just to how tough it is, this whole Kevin Love story that came out on ESPN this week, where Jackie McMullen asked him at the All-Star game last year. She shouted over the din, this is the way she wrote it, have you ever sought professional counseling? And he said yes. And he talked about how he was a perfectionist, how it was all, how it was all LeBron, how he got blamed all the time. What did Barkley say? Barkley said at one point, poor Kevin Love, every time the Cavs lost, social media blamed him. He couldn't watch TV without somebody saying the Cavs suck and it's Kevin Love's fault. I think there's always been tremendous pressure on athletes, and a lot of depression is kind of built into the game because of the highs and lows, the lifestyle, late night games. In fact, the reason they created shoot-arounds is just to get players to go to sleep. Very hard to wind down after a game. And so it just seems like, and DeMar DeRozan came out, and now suddenly the stigma of mental health, where athletes are supposed to be these super strong, powerful guys that are superheroes, can't have the same problems the rest of us have. But the game, and Chris Bosh too, was laughed at and scorned because he cried coming off the court after they lost to the Dallas, whereas he was just personally and emotionally affected, but he's supposed to be tougher than that. I'm sure you got some thoughts on that.
Well, sports back in the day, at one point taught you don't cry. You can't cry. You know, there's no crying in baseball. Right. And fortunately, it's changed. I think we have more liberal society now where a lot of things are accepted, even your sexuality. You know, hiding being gay in the NBA, NFL, or any sport, or openly gay male, you were criticized at, you were laughed at, you were ostracized. So I think society today gives you the opportunity to be who you are. And if mental illness is a part of it, because there are a lot of players, you know, they have the same issues as normal people. And if you're not able to express those things, they become worse.
You got to hide it inside.
You got to hide it.
You can't be depressed.
Who are you going to speak with? Your coach? The coach is going to look like he can't trust you. You're going to sit at the end of the bench. Who are you going to speak with? Your players? They're going to laugh at you. You're going to get ostracized out the circle. So now I love that guys are able to openly express and talk about their issues. And the NBA, I know for a fact, has are developing programs that are helping the players, because at the end of the day, you know, it's a better product for them, not to just equate it to money, but it's a better product for them. They're developing players. They care about the players. The NBA for a long time has always allowed players to speak out publicly about issues and social issues. And mental health right now is a big issue that raises to the top of a lot of people's talking lists and points. So I applaud Kevin Love for speaking, DeMar DeRozan for speaking out, and there are other players who may not even know they have some mental issues, because even missing birthdays, traveling, missing holidays, being away from your family, those things affect you mentally that a lot of people don't really take into account. So hopefully those things will come out into the open and you have, you know, better people as a product for it.
Well, that's all we got time for. Jimmy, thanks a lot, man. It's been great talking.
Thank you.
I really
Thanks
want
for
to
having me. I appreciate it.
So much more to talk about, all the attitude of fans and everything, but thanks for coming on, and we'll do it again.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening, everybody. Again, I'm Eli Zarrett, and this was No Filter, and I hope that we'll see you back again. So long.